Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Erik Kruger is a renowned leadership keynote speaker in the field of leadership and team development who has inspired audiences globally with his powerful insights and innovative strategies. He's also an accomplished author, having written multiple books, including Acta Non Verba, which encourages living a life of actions over words, and Dangerous, which outlines how to become a threat to the threats in your life. Erik's academic background is equally impressive. He holds a master's degree in executive coaching from Wits Business School, and his work has influenced companies worldwide, helping leaders to adapt to a complex future. You can find Erik at erikkruger.com. Erik, thanks for joining me today.
Brad, what a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
As you can tell, we're a one-hit record. There's no edit. So let's make the best of what we've got.
Excellent. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start off. You've worked extensively with teams to enhance their performance. What are the key components of building a high-performance team in today's fast-paced world?
I think it's so important to understand the context in which we are operating in today. And of course, there are many characteristics of this environment that we are in, but one of the most important ones for us to focus on is the fact that the world has just become increasingly complex. And we see this in so many ways. Everything feels intertwined and intertangled and interwoven. We are defining and redefining things from gender to societal norms to how we do business. And there's a quote in Will and Ariel Durant's book, The Lessons of History, where they say, I think that speaks very well to this complexity. They say, economic development specializes functions, differentiates abilities, and make men unequally valuable to their group. And when we break that down, economic development specializes functions, and we see this all around, that in every business, more functions are required to do the same thing, and I'll touch on that in a moment. And obviously, the more functions we have, the more complexity we have. So if we look at aviation as an example, back in the day, the Wright brothers were able to build a plane with maybe a handful of friends, whereas today, when you look at a Boeing, there are thousands of functions that need to come together, specialized functions, in order to create this marvel of technology. But even if we come closer to business, you look at something like marketing. Marketing used to be quite simple in the Mad Men days. You would think of a cool slogan and campaign, pump it out on print and TV, and that would be sort of your marketing campaign done. Whereas today, if you look at marketing, you need to be good at SEO and paid media and the nuances of Facebook and X and Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and newsletters and YouTube and webinars, and all of a sudden what you realize is that marketing has many, many functions. And the way that we remain valuable as human beings to our group is we differentiate our abilities into those functions. And then what you realize is that the main job of a leader today is to harmonize all of this, is to be able to bring people together who are in specialized functions with differentiated abilities and help them to align and focus their efforts on solving complex problems. Now, that's a very sort of, kind of big overview. But if we then zoom in and we look at how do we then take these teams and help them to perform better, I always like to differentiate between the task of the team and the team itself. So the task of the team is, what do we need to get done? And of course, when we focus on that, we are trying to squeeze out a bit more productivity. But ultimately, the biggest gains come from helping people to work better together. And we've seen this in the research where they've said that group norms are ultimately the thing that helps us to establish better performing teams. There are many different models you can look at that help you to create a model of team performance. My favorite one is one that I just created on my own after lots of research and working with different teams. I believe there are 3 big levers we can pull that's going to help a team to do better. It's team environment, coordination, and communication. And I'll just quickly kind of give a high-level definition of each. Team environment is how does it feel to be a part of the team? So this is typically like psychological safety and a team coordination. So you have the criticality of teamwork. You understand that it's more about the team than it is just about me. The coordination aspect is having a performance framework that aligns behavior around the team that we want to be. And then the third part is communication, which is not communicating about, how do we escalate things, or when do we escalate things, or do we use WhatsApp or Slack or email? This is purely about conversations around growth. So feedback and accountability conversations. So happy to dive into any of those, but high level, that's kind of my thinking around it.
Complexity. Let's start there.
Yeah,
the world is becoming more complex, and we've got technology, political changes. There are so many things that are making life more complex for the poor old entrepreneurs and workers who are just trying to get things done. What happens when businesses or entrepreneurs don't match the needs of that complexity? You gave the example of marketing, for example. So the marketing function, the marketing world is becoming more and more complex, but it's everywhere. It's HR, it's operations, it's sales, even leadership. What happens when companies can't keep up with that ever-changing complexity?
Well, I think the short answer is that you are then jumping onto a path of irrelevance. That's the short answer to it. I think for most leaders at this point in time, what they need to realize is that with this added complexity, 2 things are happening. First is that you don't have all the answers anymore. It's impossible for you to have all the answers. And so surrendering that need to be the one that saves the day becomes quite important. And secondly is that the only way we really get to match the complexity is that we bring people together, is that you can't do it on your own. You have to rally the team and help them or direct their efforts to solve complex problems. And so actually, and I think we'll see this more and more in times to come, is that leaders need to adopt a coaching stance. Like that becomes the predominant stance of the leader, is that I'm here to serve as the catalyst for bringing out the best in the individuals and in the team. And the more I can do that, the more I can deal with and manage the complexity that we face.
So what's the difference then between a high-performance team and an average team? How would you describe that? Maybe from the gut.
Yeah, I always just think that a high-performance team, when I've worked with these teams, there are 2 things that stand out. One is that there's an incredible sense of ownership and ambition in these teams that typically don't exist in a more average team. It's almost like your performance just matches your ambitions. So you get the sense, like when you're part of this team, that this team really wants to perform well. They want to do the work that's going to help them to be better. So there's that feeling component. But then obviously there's also just the performance component, which is that when you look at the end of the day at the metrics, whatever this team might be tracking, that they have reached unexpected levels of success. And I worked with a team last year in PepsiCo, and it was exactly this. Like the moment I stepped into the team, even though there was some dysfunction in the team and that there was a bit of infighting, what was quite clear is that the team was willing to deal with any discomfort that they might have in order to find a better way of doing things together, because they knew that each of the members of the team were incredibly smart, incredibly driven. They all have this, insatiable hunger for climbing the ladder, for doing more. But they also realized that without the support of those on their team, they're not going to achieve what they want to achieve as individuals, but also if they don't come together as a team, they won't achieve the incredible targets that have been set for them. And at the end of the year, not only did they reach those targets, they overshot, and they were one of the top teams in PepsiCo for the year. And so it's quite clear that like they do more with the same resources that other teams might have. That would be yours. I'd be interested to know what you think.
Well, it's hard. It's hard to come away. Thank you for asking. It's hard to come away from a higher percentage of A players, high performing teams, and it might be the same thing you said through a different lens or through a different name. High percentage of A players, higher productivity. The output per metric is higher. I think that the culture is also tangible. Like you can feel it, you can smell it, you can taste it in a culture where a team of A players come together. And again, I'm labeling people, but you can just tell that things get done around here. And probably I would then move to strategy and execution. And as a cheat, I'm labeling the 5 things out of a book that I wrote, which is Made to Thrive, the 5 Roles of a CEO. But it's an easy go-to, right? So strategy, your business is different than the competition. And you've got growing organic gross margin percentages in dollars because you're subsequently different and you're executing better. So yeah, a bit of a cheater answer, but
no, that's great.
That's kind of what I see. I want to come back to something that you said earlier, which is around the role of a CEO or a manager. We talk about, we've got a simple saying, is that the nurse has 100 tools, the carpenter has maybe 200 tools, but the CEO's only got one tool, and that tool is meetings. And so the way to get the leaders in a business to get things done is through meetings, assuming that has some resonance with you, and then stepping back to building high performance teams. How do leaders in businesses build high performance, use the tool of meetings to build high performance teams, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. The moment you said that, I had a different picture pop up in my mind, which is that the meeting isn't the tool, the meeting is the workshop, and what happens inside of that workshop, those are the tools that the leader utilizes. Whether that be a specific coaching style or a leadership style or modeling a certain behavior, I feel like you actually have a whole range of tools as a leader available to you that you need to utilize. But awesome. The meeting is maybe the workshop in which it kind of gets, ironed out, where you actually iron sharpens iron in the workshop. So, well, look, I think most importantly for me today is that leaders need to become very, very finely attuned to self and situational awareness. There's a saying in German, and I still after all this time, I still can't really get it right, but it's something like Fingerspitzengefühlen. I don't know if you've ever heard that word before. Something like that. I've butchered it, so okay. Probably you probably have never heard it because I butchered it. But essentially, it just means fingertip feel, and I feel like that's really what leaders need to be operating with, is to be able to adapt themselves to the situation they find themselves in, so that when you step into that meeting, that you are so finely attuned to what that person needs from you in order to access, whatever is next for them, like a new behavior or a new way of thinking, or even for them just to download some stuff that's been happening for them. If you can step into that meeting and you can know, okay, well, maybe what I need to do is open up with some vulnerability, give them the opportunity to also be a bit more vulnerable, because that's what's needed right now in this meeting. Or maybe go into a meeting and think, well, we've had meetings before, and I've had this one tool that I've used, which has been vulnerability, and it hasn't worked. Maybe I need to be a bit more transactional, or maybe I need to try a different way of delivering the feedback or the accountability. I think that's what's quite important. is that situational leadership style that ultimately we all need to have. I think that's actually the only way to think about leadership these days, is that it's about the ability to adapt to the situation and then having the tool set available to you to change the situation that's in front of you, to make the best of what's in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hallmark of a great leader. They know exactly which
For sure.
buttons to push with each of their direct reports to get the most out of them. And everyone's got different buttons, but they know that, they understand that, which is very much an EQ thing, right?
Very much. Yeah.
So I'd like to ask you about personal growth. It's a recurring theme in your work. What are the daily habits or practices that you recommend for individuals who are seeking continuous self-improvement?
You know, I remember a time when I just got into this line of work, and maybe you were the same. You know, you initially think, okay, I don't know what was your entry point to personal development? Do you remember? Might be many years ago.
It was many years ago. Yeah, I'd be giving away my age a bit, but yeah, let's just say it's been a number of decades.
Do you remember the entry point at all? Like a book or something?
Yeah. So in terms of a specific book, I mean, my business was growing super fast, and I was just trying to find anything that I could to get the walls to stay together. And so I was reading a lot at the time, and nothing was really hitting with me. There was a book called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits that gave me a sense of, okay, this is something that I can actually implement. And kudos to Vern Harnish for that book. But I really do remember, okay, this is practical. And I subsequently implemented it. That was back in around 2000, I think.
Amazing. I remember mine very clearly as well. It wasn't a book, but it was a video clip by Robin Sharma around the 5 a.m. club. And this was probably about 2008-ish, somewhere around that time. And I remember seeing the clip. Both a friend and I decided, okay, cool, this is the way forward. We're gonna wake up at 5 a.m. We're gonna just follow his process, because he had this whole thing, the power hour, golden hour type thing. So we decided we're just gonna follow the whole process. Wake up at 5, do the gym, do the meditation, blah blah blah, go through the whole thing. And then for the next few years, I was really obsessed with cultivating as many positive daily habits as I can, and specifically squeezing as many of them into my morning routine as I can. And then over time, I've come to realize that it becomes such a crux. You look at people these days, and now they're adding cold plunges and whatever to their morning routine, and you end up having this hyper-inflated morning routine in the name of personal development and productivity. But I actually think it often comes from a place of very low self-awareness. Like, what you're trying to do is just grab onto anything for some hope of something improving in your life. Instead of slowing down and really thinking about, what do I need the most that's going to help me be more effective and improve who I am? How do I go on that journey of being better every single day? Where I've landed, at least personally, I'm not overly prescriptive for people. The most important thing is, what can you do that's going to raise your self-awareness? That is the question for you to sit with when you think about personal development. What I do these days is I'll spend some time in the morning in meditation. I do Joe Dispenza meditations pretty much every single day of the week. Meditation has been an incredibly powerful tool for me, and I'll do it like a quick 20-minute meditation. So it's not like a huge hour-long thing where you sit down and think about it. And then I just love writing. I'm an author, but apart from that, I think that when I write, I get to look at my thoughts in a different way. And so I love writing as a way of reflecting on what's been happening, and then using that as the raw materials for constructing the future, for thinking about, what do I want the future to look like for myself. So if I had to give any recommendations to people from a personal development point of view, I think it's always going to be, what raises your self-awareness? And you can find many things that will do that. Meditation might help, journaling might help, having an accountability partner might help. Doing some sort of like online assessment and those kind of tools might help. But what can you do that's going to help you to be more in tune with who you are? There's some research that has shown that only 14% of us have high levels of self-awareness. So if you think you have a high level of self-awareness, you probably don't. We can all do with kind of like the constant improving of self-awareness. And then the second thing I would just recommend is you need to be very intentional with blocking out time for self-development. And not even, I mean, self-development, yes, but thinking time. Just block out some time where you can slow down and just be more intentional in how you think about your own life. Because like life is just so rushed. Everything is just so important. Very often we are operating in some level of survival mode. And what that means is that we are just reactive all day long. We just go through the day putting out fires, trying to get to the end of the day. We don't slow down to proactively think about the future. When we are being reactive, we also operating from a place of fear, frustration, and anxiety. This place tricks our minds. We think the world's going to end. We think challenges are bigger than they are. We think things are likely to go wrong. And so it just keeps us stuck in this loop of being reactive all the time. And if you can carve out some time where you slow down and you really just think about what's happening in your life, in your business, in your relationships, I promise you the insights that come from that is pretty spectacular. But it only comes from a space of intentionally slowing down. I used to, like during COVID, I ran a thing called Think Week. And Think Week, you might know, like Bill Gates does a Think Week twice a year. Yeah. And he goes away for an entire week. I did this in a week-long process where I would have people just join for 90 minutes. And every day we would have one big idea that we'd think about in the context of our own lives. And I was always just amazed at the insights people could generate from 3 to 4 minutes of just slowing down. And I was like, that's how busy and reactive we are, is that when we are given 4 minutes of uninterrupted time just to think, all of a sudden, like magic.
Yeah.
But in the interim, like just from one thing to the next, like our brains just never get to slow down.
It's that complexity and that busyness. Our poor old brains, which is really like a muscle, is like an engine that's just going as hard as it can all the time. I want to pick up on what you said there. So I asked you about personal growth and habits, and you said self-awareness. Before the podcast, we spoke about a book called Ego is the Enemy. And your reaction indicated to me, at the time, that you'd read it, and B, that it had an impact on you. So when you think about self-awareness and you think about ego is the enemy, what was the impact that ego is the enemy had on you, and how does that translate or impact self-awareness perhaps?
Yeah. I think I've always known that I'm quite status-driven. That I like to be associated with the best. That when I'm doing my digital marketing, that I'm hiring guys who do like a phenomenal job at it, because the image that I put out into the world is really important to me. That it needs to be polished and professional and stand out as much as possible. Yeah. And so I know that there's a part of me that likes attention, that likes the status of it. But then I also acknowledge that there are many times where that gets in the way, where I might or I should do a certain thing, but I'll be like, I don't know. I guess if I'm very honest, in my mind, it'll go, oh, that's beneath me. Or someone of that status wouldn't do this. And so, yeah, when I hear ego as the enemy, it triggers a little something in me, which isn't a bad thing, which just goes, yeah, there are probably some things in your business right now that you need to be doing that you aren't doing because of ego. And you need to actually put that pride aside a little bit and just go and do it. So, yeah, I think it's always been in the periphery for me, and I've had that awareness. But as is true for all of us, these are things we need to be constantly working on. And you often, like you'll have raised this for me again today, and like so now, obviously it's in my awareness, and I'll be working on it a bit. But then if you don't keep working on it, at some point it just rears its head again. And that's the importance of this like daily practice that you spoke about, is that we always just need to stay in the flow of this improvement.
For the audience who haven't read Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Halliday, it doesn't infer that either of us are particularly egotistical, but the underlying premise is that ego is the enemy of everything that you really want. And it's like you've got this little devil on your shoulder, like we perhaps used to see in the old cartoons, and it's telling you, this is what you really should do, when it's actually not what you really want to do, and it actually actively works against you. And so then coming back to self-awareness, it kind of ties all of those really together quite nicely. Thank you. So you also talk about change. A part of life is change and adapting. Charles Darwin, we know
everything in life is changing and adapting. Yes.
Yeah, Charles Darwin, the theory of evolution. It wasn't the strongest that survived. It was those who were most able to adapt to the new environment. And so you speak extensively about change. What are the biggest challenges that people face when it comes to change? Probably in a business sense, but I'm happy for you to take it where you feel, and how they overcome these obstacles.
Yeah, my realization has been that change isn't just part of the game. It is the game to play, and it's the game to be good at, because whether we are looking at internal or external motivations, everything you want is on the other side of change. Whether you want to be a better partner, parent, leader, whether it is the environment that demands from you that you change with change, everything is on the other side of change. And so it really is in our best interest to become much better at it. Like if you can increase the odds of you succeeding and making certain changes in your life, then objectively your life will be much better for it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, change is a very messy process. Sometimes we get lucky and there are certain things that we need to change in our lives, and it's pretty straightforward. But I think the challenge that we really face is that change has two aspects to it. There's the technical challenge and the adaptive challenge. And the technical challenge is just what's in front of you. What is the change you need to make? So let's use artificial intelligence as an example. The change you need to make is you need to start employing artificial intelligence in your business. Okay, cool. That's pretty straightforward. Everyone is smart enough because we've all had phones for a very long time, and most AI is just kind of like using an app. So most of us are smart enough to actually just log on to ChatGPT, start playing with it, start figuring it out, and seeing how it can be integrated into our businesses. What's going to stop you isn't your intellect and the technical side of it. What's going to stop you is the adaptive challenge, because the adaptive challenge says there's a part of you that needs to change with this change. That for many, many years, you felt very competent at doing a certain thing, and now you have to come down from the mountain of competence and start doing something new, and you're going to be looking, or you might feel like a beginner, an amateur, a newbie, and you don't want to feel that. And so because you want to not feel this feeling, that's why you don't engage with artificial intelligence. It's not because of the actual tool itself. It's because of this internal narrative that's happening. And so the more we can understand that change is more emotional in nature than anything else, the more we can facilitate change for ourselves, but also the better we can lead change. And this is the problem that I see within our businesses, is that leaders are so focused on the thing that needs to change that they neglect the transition that people need to go through at the same process, that people are dealing with an ending, that like it's the ending of an era, it's an ending of my identity in how I showed up in a certain way, and I have to recalibrate all of this. And the more you can help me to recalibrate this, the more successful the change is going to be. If we just keep focusing on the thing that needs to change, we'll encounter resistance, and we'll go, well, why are you being so resistant? Why can't you just figure this out? And it's never been a smart or intellect thing. It's purely that you need to understand people are being bombarded with change from every single angle. It's change in our personal lives, in our professional lives. There are big changes like, companies that are restructuring. There are people that are moving, people that are getting divorced, people that are dealing with death. like all of this is happening in people's lives all at the same time, meaning that they are recalibrating their identity around 1,000 different changes that are happening. And then on top of that, it's like feeling the push from the world, like the world keeps moving forward, like the progress keeps happening, and you need to just keep up with it. And so, people are very overwhelmed. They are sometimes cynical because they don't trust that the leaders know what they're doing in regards to change, or maybe they've said many times we need to change, and then like nothing happens, because of it. So you are, in some ways, that's what you're having to deal with, is the overwhelm and the cynicism. And if you think you can just deal with that by looking at the technical challenge of it, then you are likely to fail at helping people to change.
So do you think that that one can improve one's adaptability?
Yeah, for sure. I think we need to get to this mindset where you are just in this state of adaptability. That's really it, because if you think about changes that you've gone through in your life before, it's most likely that for some period of time you knew you had to make this change, but it didn't happen. And then at some point you step into this like sort of state of adaptability, or the zone of adaptability, and all of a sudden like it becomes a bit easier. Like it's almost like your mind has become more receptive and more open to this change, and now like things start falling into place. And there is this model called the readiness for change model that speaks about the different stages of change people go through. So pre-contemplation, meaning I'm not even thinking about the change. Contemplation, okay, I'm thinking that there might be some changes I need to make. Preparation or planning, which is, okay, let me start mapping out what this might look like, and then getting into the action phase, then getting into the maintenance phase, and then finally the termination phase. So there is a bit of research that says, okay, we need to go through a certain process in our minds to get to this like state of readiness to change. The challenge, I think, is actually we need to try and be in that state all the time. Is whenever you are confronted with new information, how do you almost create the habit of openness? That when that information comes to me, I'm not just shutting it down, because that's actually where adaptability starts, is that there's new information, AI comes out, or crypto or whatever, blockchain. Instead of just shutting it down, I'm just like, okay, what might this be? That's the first step of you like being more adaptable. And so if we can just stay in that state, I think we become much better at dealing with change. At the same time, we also need to become a lot more pedantic and clear with our language around change, because there's a positioning challenge that we have in organizations. We often say, there are a few different challenges with this, but one of the things we often say is we have to just embrace change. And what you are kind of saying is that, it's like speaking to a kid and giving them bad medicine and saying like, this is good for you, but like just swallow it down, just embrace it. Yeah. Change isn't a bad thing, but we treat it as such, So like, even subconsciously, we just communicate to people that, oh, yes, this sucks, but just do it. So that's one part of the positioning we need to fix. And the other part is to think that we can threaten people into change. If you don't change, AI is going to take your job. No, that's the wrong way to approach it. How about we help people to think about how AI can help them improve and do their jobs better? And so there's all these small messages that we are sending out to people that I think just takes them out of that state of readiness, whereas what we want is just to keep them in that state and in that flow as much as possible.
Yeah. So that's adaptability, but then you often talk about also resilience and mental toughness. So what are maybe some strategies or tactics that individuals might be able to adopt to improve their resilience or mental toughness?
Yeah, what's interesting is that I find myself speaking less and less about resilience these days, because I often think that if you are flexible and adaptable, that creates the resilience. If you face a challenge and you face it with openness, already it takes a lot less of your cognitive and emotional resource to deal with it, because you're not fighting it. You're just going into it going, well, how do I solve this? How do I adapt to this? And one challenge that resilience has, just as a concept often, is that it's not always good to be resilient, that sometimes the old needs to be broken down. Sometimes that the things that are trying to show you a different way should just show you a different way, instead of you like just persevering through it. Like if your business keeps getting hammered in whatever way, you can be resilient, and like we applaud that resilience, But if you're not learning the lesson, if you're not going, oh, well, actually, I need to do it in a different way, then that resilience is actually getting in the way of you being more successful and getting to the other side. So I think resilience is something that we should treat carefully. I'm in the mindset of I want to favor flexibility over resilience. That I want to just keep changing with change, and that I want to be very careful that I'm not resilient in the wrong things. Having said that, one thing I'll just include is when it comes to being resilient, and if we just, speaking about it in terms of the mental toughness component that you mentioned, I think what's really important is that you start building your mental toughness before you need it. It's the same when we speak about networking, it's always the same thing. It's like you get into like this tough spot and you're like, oh, I need a network, but you should have been building your network before you got to the point where you needed your network. And so mental toughness is very much the same things. Find the things that'll help you cultivate a stronger mindset before you need to use those tools or deploy that mindset. And the way that I would just do it is I would make sure that I have activities and behaviors in my day-to-day that just keep me at my best, and whatever that might look like, so that it's a break from just the work that you do. And, just talking for myself, this is my daily walk with my dogs. Like that to me is a non-negotiable. It is the meditation practice. And it is spending time with my wife. Like those kind of things, when I don't have that, it reduces my capacity to be resilient tremendously. But because I keep building that capacity, I find that it's much easier to deal with challenges that I face.
Awesome. So adaptability, mental toughness, resilience. And now I want to ask about mind shift in leadership. Mind shift. So what is mind shift? It's a concept that you talk about, and why is it important, and why should leaders consider that?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it is being able to change your opinions and your views and your perspectives on the world. And the reason why it's so important is just because the world is changing. And unfortunately, if you keep trying to solve tomorrow's problems with today's mindset, it's just going to happen. Yeah. So I think that the openness to new ideas and the trying out of new ideas is, that's what progress is about. Unfortunately,
I think, don't you? You see it so often where leaders are just stuck in the old way and they just can't evolve or adapt, and it's just so costly.
I think a phenomenon that kind of causes this is something I call thinking in glances, which is that we go through our day, scrolling through an algorithm that feeds us new ideas. And what happens is that we come across an idea, we think about it, we glance at the idea, we think about this for a brief second, let's use the 80-20, something very simple, 80-20 principle as an idea. We think about this, we go, I really like this, 20% of my output comes from 80% of my, 80% of my outputs come from 20% of my efforts. So what are the few things that I can do that's going to give me the biggest boost? And you go, wow, I really like that. And then you scroll on. And then it's the next idea and the next idea and the next idea. And all you do is you keep glancing at these ideas instead of going, well, okay, let me just take that into that thinking time that I spoke about earlier. And let me really apply this model to my business. Okay, what might this now look like? And same thing, you come across AI and you go, okay, well, here's this cool tool. Instead of me just scrolling past it, what if I just go and spend a bit of time playing with it? And all of a sudden, you're taking something out of the ether and you're making it a bit more substantial, because that's the only way that learning really happens. A mindset shift, it's learning. And learning only happens when it becomes a new way of thinking or a new way of doing becomes ingrained in how you show up. But that's the problem. We kind of living in this sort of pseudo-learning era. and leaders feel like they are learning. They're getting the dopamine hit of feeling like they're learning, but they actually haven't learned a thing.
It feels like the next step change is going to be people who discover compounding when it comes to use, like actually, or avoiding the algorithms. I know Cal Newport's done a lot of work on that, but finding a way to get out of that so you can actually build momentum in your life or your business. It really feels like there is a step change coming around that, because everybody recognizes that these algorithms are dominating our life and making us so much more ineffective than we should be in a world where compounding matters.
I don't know what your experience is, because you obviously work with many businesses as well, but I often find that, well, in fact, 70% of the teams that I survey when we start working with them tell me they don't have dedicated learning and development time. Is that something that you see as well?
Well, we don't measure it, but I absolutely believe that. And so the way that we approach that, yeah, I would believe, if you said it was 90%, I'd probably believe that. But the way that we approach that is when we do quarterly and annual planning sessions, i.e. every 90 days, we ask every single team member, leadership team member, what is your personal professional development goal for the next 90 days? And it could be to read this or to read that or to complete some kind of growth. And it's a habit that we make stick because it's just so important for all the reasons that we know. Which is a perfect segue, unless you wanted to close that out, because my next question is, what is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
You know, a book that has had a tremendous impact on me has been Seth Godin's book, The Dip. And it's a very, it's a quick read. So that's my favorite kind of book. When I wrote my second book, Dangerous, I actually modeled it specifically on The Dip, in terms of like, I measured the height and the length of the book. I looked at the amount of pages in the book. I wanted to write a similar book because it was so easy to read. And The Dip is just about this idea that whenever you are trying something new, whenever you are trying to forge your way towards mastery, build a new business, you have to expect that at some point you will encounter the dip. And this is when like that initial momentum kind of stalls out, and now you have to start figuring out, is this the route I'm going to go through? Like, am I going to persevere through this in order to be one of the best once I get to the other side? Because if you aren't one of the best, then the rewards accrue to you becomes minimalized. So you want to be one of the best. So is this a path worth pursuing and pushing through the dip? Or is there a pivot that needs to happen? Or are you perhaps in some sort of a dead end and you need to pursue something completely different to what you're doing? So yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Awesome. The Dip by Seth Godin. What do you think that a better business looks like for you and most of the people that you deal with? How would you describe a better business? The context here is that the book that I'm writing at the moment is called Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. So what do you think a better business looks like for you?
I think a better business is more aligned with what's important to you, and we spoke about this a bit earlier, that so often we are influenced not often, all the time, we are influenced by the world around us. And today, because of the social media influence, even more so. And so it can be very difficult to build something that feels true to who you are. Yeah. And you don't want to just build something because you want certain numbers on a board, or because your friend is doing that, or because the world has said to you that the only way to build a business is to raise and then sell your soul for it. I have a friend that's going through this right now, where he's building a great AI-powered business. And he has this tension because he needs to go and raise if he wants to be a big player. That's what we are told. And to be honest, that's actually what you need. You need the ammo to go and play, in the States. But at the same time, he doesn't want to sell his soul to investors and be, driven by what they want him to do and push his business to the extremes that might be required to get the exit that investors would want. And so I think even if I look at his journey, it's about building a business and running a business that is true to the values that you have and the things that are important to you.
Wow. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. How can people learn more about you and your business?
Yeah, the easiest is to just Google my name, Erik Kruger, and you'll find all the different entry points. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so people can always connect to me there.
Wonderful. Now, what haven't we discussed today that you wanted to discuss?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I can talk for hours about adaptability and how do we cultivate that more. And I think if I can just leave people with one thing, it's just to keep that in mind. Change isn't just a skill to master; it's the master skill. And so, get yourself into that constant state of readiness and openness. And the world it's a magnificent place. All the changes we are seeing in the world. Who knows where that takes us? It's very exciting. The possibilities are endless. But if you are constantly fearing change, then I think the world's going to become a dreadful place to live in because it's coming from all angles. So just do your best. Just try to live more into this flow of change. And I promise you'll be surprised at what you might see come out on the other side of that.
Wonderful. Erik, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks to you, Brad.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.